Comic books stand out as being one of the most dynamic and visually striking mediums, and with hundreds of new comics being released every week, boasting revamped costumes and mega crossover events, how can any one comic stick out, much less one about yet another superhero? Put simply, you do exactly what Marvel and DC won't. Enter Cory Walker and Robert Kirkman in 2003. After a failed pitch for their creation Science Dog, yes, really, the two were tasked with creating a new title that would add to Image Comics' surprisingly small library of notable superheroes. While radical characters such as Spawn already existed in Image, the two opted to return to the idea of the teenage superhero. The duo created a comic book-loving high schooler named Mark Grayson, with the first issue proudly proclaiming, "Girls, acne, homework, supervillains. When you're a teenager, it helps to be invincible." And while Mark's character is reminiscent of Peter Parker imbued with the powers of Superman, the complete creative freedom afforded by Image is really what allows Invincible to stand out. When you read a Marvel or DC comic, you enter into a universe that's more than half a century old, and while that continuity can be rewarding for longtime readers, it's often convoluted, confusing, and straight up broken, no matter how many writers try to fix it. However, in Invincible, the majority of the characters were made for the book, and that means their characterization is developed in one centralized story. You don't need to read 4 other books to get the full narrative, like some mainstream comics, and you're guaranteed that the character's history will be respected from issue to issue. Sometimes, after decades of a character's publication, it's hard for writers to sort out everything they've been through. Most of these characters are older than the people writing them, and that can make it difficult to play catch-up. But Kirkman wrote all 144 issues over the 13 years Invincible was published, and thus brings the reader on a more streamlined and intimate journey. We know where Mark lives, we check up on his relationships, we get to know him in a way you just can't at a company like Marvel, whose comics regularly have trouble getting past issue number 12, often in favor of launching a shiny new number 1 issue to boost sales. And it's those short-minded strategies that Kirkman strives to resist. You probably also know Kirkman as the creator of The Walking Dead, and like The Walking Dead, when a character dies in Invincible, they're more than likely gone for good. It's an ongoing joke in the comic community that death for superheroes is more like a revolving door than a pearly gate, and in that sense, the cliffhanger moments in comics have lost their meaning. However, when something tragic happens in Mark's life, or any of the characters' lives in Invincible, it's heartbreaking because you know it's going to stick with them. There's no going back in Invincible. There's no universal reset button that makes things go back to normal. Now look at SpiderMan, whose 2 largest status quo changes, being married to Mary Jane and unmasking himself to the world, were completely erased, effectively invalidating decades worth of comics. So it's understandable why readers get tired of so-called universe-altering stories that never end up mattering. Eventually, it just ends up being generic super people punching each other. Fights in Invincible, on the other hand, not only have the weight of real, lasting change, but are unapologetically brutal compared to Marvel and DC, as Mark experiences what being a superhero would actually mean. Being a hero means trauma, it means hard decisions, and it means getting your hands dirty, literally. Ryan Ottley, the series' consistent artist for 127 of the issues in the series, depicts this violence in such an over-the-top comedic way, comparable only to maybe Mortal Kombat, showing the realities of what a battle between super people would really look like, with enough cartooniness and color to keep the comic from ever seeming too grim. And Invincible doesn't exist to subvert the superhero genre in a shocking way. It's here to refine it, and in many ways poke fun at the comic book industry. It's an achievement and a celebration of all superheroes, written to encompass everyone's favorite parts of comics, while leaving behind everything that's held them back for years. Eventually, Kirkman foresaw an ending for Invincible, and after one of the longest runs in creator-owned comic history, he wrote an ending to Mark's story, something many comic book characters may never get. And that final page of that final issue is one of the most bittersweet. You know what? Just go read it for yourself.